François-Philippe Champagne is Canada's Minister of Infrastructures and Communities, and he's with me now in the studio. It's good to see you again.
Pleasure to be back, I should say.
Thanks for
Pleasure
being here.
to be back.
You've been on. You've visited some of these flood zones. You've been on some of the front lines here. What have you been seeing?
Well, a lot of stranded people. I went to mainly in Quebec. You know, I went to La Beauce when there were the first floods that appeared, and it was unbelievable to see. Anyone who's disputing that there's climate change, I would say go visit the people who have been flooded. What we're seeing is that these extreme weather events are becoming more frequent and more powerful. I mean, actually in Beauceville, you could see, and you've seen some of the image, I think the river is basically flowing in the middle of town. I went in Louisville this weekend, and I was accompanied by the Canadian Forces because the only way to access it is by Zodiac.
Right.
You know, you can no longer use the road.
You have to get around by boat now.
Oh, you have to get around by boat. And but what I was most amazed, Peter, is the resilience of people. I went in houses. My mission was really to see those who are really stranded, those who cannot go by without using a boat, to see how they were doing, what was going on. First thing that I saw was resiliency. The second thing, I was really impressed by the coordination between the first responders, the Canadian Forces, the police forces. So things were well underway. And the third thing I would say is that somehow people almost have adapted to these events. You know, when I went there first in 2017, where in Quebec, you may recall, we were calling them historic. Now, this time I felt that we were a bit more prepared in terms of the people who have been flooded were more prepared. So they were a bit more resilient in the system.
But that's part of the concern, isn't it? That these are now no longer once-in-a-century events. We're starting to see them more often. And so people are getting better at preparing for them because they know they're coming more often. And that speaks to the issue, doesn't it?
Well, totally. I mean, the first thing is to take care of people. That's the first thing. But once this is done and once the water has receded, I think the Prime Minister of Canada was clear this weekend to say, we'll have to think where we build and how we build in this country and have a national discussion around that. That's why I wrote to the province of Quebec, province of Ontario, and New Brunswick to say, when you're doing that thinking, we have funds available at the federal level to help municipalities to adapt to climate change, what I call that sad new reality, which is the impact of climate change.
But this is it's a $2 billion fund, right?
Yeah, we have three different things actually they can do. We have first, you may have seen the gas tax refund that we sent to the provinces about to the municipalities, $2.2 billion. So that can be used, part of that can be used for disaster adaptation. The second thing, under the integrated bilateral agreement we signed with every provinces and territories in Canada, there is a green infrastructure component to that, and money can be used as well there to do smaller projects. When you're talking about the big strategic infrastructure project above 20 million, this is the fund you were talking about, the $2 billion national fund, which we call disaster mitigation adaptation.
Right, but what's interesting in reading up for this, our conversation, is it's you know, some of the provinces hardest hit, Quebec and New Brunswick and Ontario, have not taken you up on this fund.
And that's why I wrote to them. In a sense, I said, listen, we've approved already out of $2 billion, about $1 billion in dozens of projects around Canada. I was in British Columbia just last week announcing a number of projects. We announced some in Drumheller in Alberta. We announced some in Calgary. But what I was saying to them is that what I would be willing to do, obviously, because it's all hands on deck. I said, if you send me project, I'll look at them on an emergency basis.
Accelerate the process.
Accelerated process. We'll look at them. And the reason is that the construction season is at our doorstep. So first priority is to take care of people, making sure that those who have in need of assistance are well taken care of. When water is receded, then we need to start thinking very quickly, what are we going to do to prevent that? Because for me, if we don't invest in disaster mitigation adaptation, we're going to spend in disaster rehabilitation year after year.
Well,
so this is not only the smart thing to do, it's the right thing to do.
Look at what's happening right now. There, as of, I think this afternoon, there are now 2,000 Canadian soldiers on the front lines of these floods. I mean, how often and how... I mean, is that how we're going to deal with this from year to year? Is send soldiers in and call on volunteers because the same places are going to be flooded, and worse probably year after year is what is what the pattern now suggests to us. So
well, asking the question is answering it in the sense that people see that climate change is real, the impact is clear, it's more and more frequent, more and more devastating. So the smart thing to do is really to invest in disaster adaptation so that we can build the dikes where we can. I said to some provinces, there might be other places where you just can't, and you have to look at other solutions. But where you can, I'm looking at Gatineau here, I'm looking at other places. Is there a way that we can build engineering or design cities or shorelines which would protect the communities? Because
for a new reality.
Well, exactly, because there's a huge social, human, and economic cost to all that. Like you said, we cannot sustain that year after year. We need to adapt, and we are prepared to be helpful in that.
Let me ask you about how prepared the province of Quebec, where you're from. The premier in that province has said, look, we don't want to keep paying out compensation year after year for the same neighborhoods and same towns and villages that get flooded. So we'll cap the compensation at $100,000, then we're going to offer $200,000 for people to move off the floodplain and move somewhere else. Is that something the federal government needs to consider? Is that something the federal government might consider putting up funds for if we have to make decisions about, look, we're not going to keep rescuing people from these floods, and we're not going to keep paying to mitigate floods in this area. We're going to leave this area.
Well, there's already arrangement at the federal provincial level when it comes to disaster response. Minister Goodell has been clear to say we're always there to help provinces. There's already arrangements. There's formula in place. That, for me, is the emergency response. But when this is done, I think, just like you and I were talking, we need to think where we're going to build, how we're going to build, and how do we build resiliency in the system. That's where we're coming up with the infrastructure money and say, listen, we can help in that. We can help, for example, to move critical public infrastructure, which provide essential services to people. Because one of the big things that we have to be...
Right, but the federal government's not in the business of providing funding for an individual homeowners to
that's
compensate
more the
them for moving away.
That's more the provincial level. But the plan is to work together because, like I was saying, our fund can help, for example, to move public services to other places, for example. Because one of the big issues you have when you have flooding is the contamination with flood water and clean water, drinking water. So we need, like you said, it's a sad new reality, but we need to adapt to climate change. So we might need to move critical, essential public service type of infrastructure away from flooding zones into safer zones so that we start building cities in a way that is more intelligent. Like you said, either we invest or we're going to spend. That's how I put it to people. Right. If we invest in disaster mitigation, we won't have to spend in disaster rehabilitation every year.
All right, François-Philippe Champagne, Canada's Minister of Infrastructure. Thank you.
It's always a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.